Hello everyone and welcome to NSF's webinar, and today we're going to be talking about quality culture and why it's critical to manufacturing success, and indeed why it's critical to regulatory and business success too. Throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions, please feel free to email these to healthsciences@nsf.org. I'll repeat that at the end of the webinar as well, so you know where to send any questions or inquiries. So let's get started. And what I want to do first is just obviously introduce myself. My name's Sam Atkinson. I've been with NSF for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency for about 16 or so years. That's the UK medicines regulator. I wanted to start today with a bit of a quote. The quote here, as you can see, came from a gentleman called Louis Gerstner. His quote says, "Until I came to IBM, I probably would have told you that culture was just one element amongst several important elements in an organization's makeup and success, along with vision, strategy, marketing, financials, and the like." He went on to say, "And I could have told you how I went about tapping into or changing those attributes. The descriptions would have been accurate, but in one important respect, I would have been wrong." I'll leave you to consider what that one important element is, and I'll come back onto that towards the end of today's session. So why am I showing you this? Well, in the early 1990s, IBM had hit a new low and was really struggling. IBM's stock price dropped from around $43 in 1987 to around $13 in 1990, or in the 1990s. There were a number of predictions around that time that it was the end of IBM. The size of IBM was very large and cumbersome. It was less agile, and many felt that it would fail. And really, it wasn't meeting the needs of the changing market, or indeed the changing, the changing base of customers that they were dealing with. In fact, some were saying that elephants can't dance or move like ants, really trying to suggest that they weren't very agile or flexible. But what's interesting, if you look at this slide here, after Gerstner took over, the market value of IBM rose to around 29 billion, from 29 billion, sorry, to 208 billion. So a huge difference, massive increase in value. So what actually happened? What did Gerstner do? Gerstner really came in and turned things around. What he did initially was to try and understand the problems and the culture. He spent time with as many IBM employees as possible. He lived among them and he lived like them. He really wanted to embed himself in the organization and understand what people were feeling and seeing and doing. He patiently listened to them. He gathered ideas and solutions and ways to execute those solutions when he actually identified them. He understood the workforce better, which later helped him understand how to influence them going forwards. He also made sure he understood the problems. IBM had become almost a monopoly, and so they had become complacent, especially around customer service. Gerstner described it as one-sided servicing rather than looking at the challenging needs that customers were facing and the changing needs. The employees lost their passion and were just going through the motions on a day-to-day basis. They had very low levels of engagement and motivation. Bureaucracy had also affected the customer experience and service delivery, delaying new product approvals and launches, for example. IBM perhaps took 5 years, whereas competitors were taking 18 months to launch new products or approvals. Some of the solutions Gerstner felt were possible really came about his understanding of the level of customer engagement. He felt that IBM had really lacked focus on this area, and this was a major reason that the organization was struggling. Customer-facing employees needed really to spend more time with their customers, observe and listen and understand the changing needs, and help reinvent the products as things were moving forwards. He also thought he needed to remove internal tensions and inefficient procedures, such as cross-charging between IBM's geographical business units. He wanted more involvement as well from his leaders and managers. He wanted to see them as part of the team. And he wanted to change the reward and recognition process and promotion system to make it very inclusive and much fairer. He changed the strategy overall to solutions for customers. And this was a really big shift to really put his mark on the vision of IBM. Gerstner also, interestingly, got a lot of publicity for abolishing IBM's famous white shirt and tie dress code, a small part of this culture change. And when we think about culture, he also looked at the internal culture. He embedded new values around respect, inclusivity, and safety, much better than a sort of culture of fear and blame that there had been previously. He ensured all managers were actively involved with hands-on management and accountability. He wanted decision-making to be moved to provide greater levels of responsibility and empowerment. He restructured the organisation. He consolidated the many IBM units into one IBM organisation to really align the business to the strategy and make it much more agile. He scrutinised cost structures and drove efficiencies and savings, and he established a strong leadership team going forwards. So knowingly, or perhaps not, Gerstner was identifying and correcting misalignments. Galbraith's star here that you see on this slide on the right-hand side is one of my favourite theories. Galbraith, he has this fantastic star model which encompasses everything from strategy, process, rewards, people, structure. And these all must be in alignment to really ensure that an organisation is operating optimally. Strategy is very much around direction. So what is set by the leaders, corporate and strategic goals, and how these drive direction. Structure obviously refers to organisational design, but also authority, empowerment, how delegation is used, ultimately who has the decision-making powers. Processes relate to information flows and how they are set up to enable your desired business model. Rewards obviously drive motivation and incentivize employees in the direction of your desired business model, vision, and outcomes. The people element, this really considers skills, capabilities, and capacity to support that desired direction. And what you'll have heard me talk through in terms of the action that Gerstner took is very much around finding alignments between all of these different elements to really drive forward the change that he wanted to see both in the organisation from a business perspective, so really that focus on customers and the solutions for customers, but driving that forward through cultural change as well as operational change. As an industry, we have an awful lot to learn actually from other sectors and other successes like the IBM success. And culture obviously is what we're talking about today. And I just wanted to flag that we have launched a quality culture white paper, which is available here, and you can see the website address on the slide. Feel free, please, to go online and download the paper. And as I say, if you have any follow-up questions about the white paper or anything we're saying today, then please do get in touch. But culture is so key. You know, why is getting it right important? You know, we want to ensure that we have the road to success. We want to ensure that we can deliver change. And we really want to see how we can actually get to the point of success. And they're all the different elements that I'll be talking about today. So let's consider why it's important first off. This slide here just shows you a couple of clippings that I've taken. Next couple of slides do as well. And this one particularly really talks about why it's important from a patient perspective. We have shortages all across the globe and across our global supply chain. This comes at a cost for patients specifically, in terms of them needing to find alternative supplies or alternative products. But it also comes at a cost to individuals or to the health services across the globe. So generally, we want to get it right. We want to ensure that we don't have supply disruptions for patients. But we also can see that there's a wider cost because of supply disruptions. And here you can see the difference, that price increases by about 26% in periods of shortage. So again, that cost across the whole sector is really felt, and across the whole landscape. And when we look at the picture of what shortages we have at the moment, I mean, this is one example of some data from the BGMA in the UK, which demonstrates very clearly that the picture is continually getting worse. And we hear fairly routinely in the news of shortages increasing. And this is certainly of interest to regulators like the US FDA, EMA, and indeed the UK. So how do we get to the road, on the road to success? How do we actually start to turn this around? How do we minimise those shortages? How do we therefore optimise our internal operations and our culture that really drive that business success? Well, it's not easy, and I'd like to just tell you a bit of a story, a bit of an analogy. And that, well, this relates to a story I heard when I was having a bit of a discussion over dinner on a business meeting. And someone was talking about the comparison between, for example, a brain surgeon and a mechanic. Perhaps slightly outside of our sector, but the culture element here and the point is the same. What they were saying was that there's a comparison between the work of a brain surgeon and a mechanic. But somebody else piped up and said, well, actually, I'm a brain surgeon and I don't believe this is the case. When you're a mechanic, you're working on a car that is stopped, it's turned off. You can actually make the adjustments while it's in the stationary mode, while it's not moving, while things are all fixed and still. He said a brain surgeon, or indeed any surgeon, has to operate on a human being generally, and in those circumstances, the entire system is still operating, still moving, still going, and it's so much harder. What I'd say about changing culture here is it's similar. When you're trying to change organizational culture, you're not doing it in an organization that's paused, that's in standstill. The organization is continually moving, it's continually changing and evolving, and you're trying to adjust elements of it across the entire organization at that same time. So what I would say is it's difficult, it's not easy. Gerstner, as we heard, he really focused on customer engagement, really thinking about that as his key driver for his cultural change. In our world, I would say that it's not just customer. We think about customers much broader. It's engagement with customers, yes, but partners, regulators, other stakeholders, all of that's essential, both internally and externally to our organisation. And we have to consider that when we're trying to adapt our organisation, both from an operational point of view, but also from a cultural point of view. What is understood, though, is that if we improve employee experience, what comes from that is that the customer, and I use that in the broadest sense of the term, so customer, partner, regulator, stakeholders, our customers' experience is also improved. And if we improve our customer experience, this actually leads to greater levels of business success. And as you can see here, you can see that flow on the slide, which shows that where we have fully engaged and motivated employees, we can see that we get loyalty and satisfaction from our customer base, which leads to greater levels of things like reputation, growth of the organization, follow-on business, etc. That's how the mechanism works. So how do we then create positive employee experience? Well, to do that, we obviously have to look at a number of different elements that impact the employee, and culture is one of those key areas, along with processes and um, the technology, the tools that they're using, but as well the business and working environment. And this a little bit aligns to the Galbraith star that I was talking about earlier. But it is fairly logical, albeit it's not so easy as we've been talking about. If we get it right, however, what we do see is we get that employee engagement, that employee experience, and therefore we get a much higher performing organisation. So it is really worth spending that time to try and enhance the employee experience. How do we do that? How do we deliver the change? Well, we have NSF have a QMM maturity assessment tool. This follows on very much from the US FDA's QMM drive, their real push to enhance the maturity of quality management across organisations that they are interacting with. NSF's tool really does help an organisation move forward. It's certainly something that helps you understand first where the organisation is, what maturity level your organisation is at, to then be able to go on to look at things like culture. QMM does encompass all of those different areas, from strategic, tactical, and operational, and culture features in that. It's a holistic view of the effectiveness and robustness of the quality system and the culture. But importantly, it's not an audit. It is that different perspective, different mindset, if you like. But it gives an understanding of an organisation's status, of its maturity, and provides an understanding of the activities and the roadmap for change in order to enhance the maturity level. I've previously talked about QMM on a different webinar, so again, please get in touch if you'd like the link for that, or if you'd like to know more about QMM. But once you have done the QMM assessment and you understand your maturity levels, you have your roadmap of change, which includes that culture piece. We then look at how we can develop that culture roadmap. What we need to see is, I guess, an organisation that's not going to sit there in a period of stagnation, which we often do see. We want to see them, organisations recognise that the culture needs a change. So that first point of recognition is really important. So accepting that culture could be improved is a really early learning point for an organisation. But to identify that, an organisation needs to look for the signals, needs to keep an eye on other organisations and see where their standing is compared to others. And we need to be looking out for any unexpected changes of activities or performance. This also really helps identify if culture is changing across an organisation. But leaders are really critical in any cultural change, both ensuring the right measures are being monitored, that problems are being spotted in the first place, but also driving forward a cohesive approach to that cultural change. It might sound simple, but it can be challenging. It can be very difficult to know where to start. But NSF experts are experienced practitioners in this area. We can look at a broad scope across the organisation, and the level of depth can be very much scaled depending on different factors, perhaps complexity or the size of an organisation, to really pull out any misalignments that we see across those areas of the assessment inquiry, but equally that align very much to this Galbraith star model. So looking for misalignments is the really important point here. The vision must be really transparently clear. The golden thread from that vision must filter all the way through the organisation, through organisation and corporate goals and strategies, through to team objectives, and then through to individual objectives. That's how we gain that alignment. That plus the process changes that align to the activities, ensuring that the culture is really embedded throughout. But leaders should take the role of role models, and they're very well placed to do that, to really drive and live those cultural objectives. Let me give you a couple of case studies to give you an example of what we're looking at and what we find when we go to organisations. It might help bring this to life. So here, a tension between strategy and rewards is, for example, and something I've seen on many occasions, is where we have a KPI which is around zero tolerance for human error. And that's a really quite a very descriptive and very harsh kind of metric in a sense. These metrics do, however, drive certain behaviours. We are all human beings at the end of the day, and we will act in a certain way. Some people will be very driven to do the best they can for this sort of metric, really trying to drive down human error. Other individuals may feel embarrassed or shy at sharing an error that they perhaps have made. And as such, it might result in perhaps a non-compliant manner of dealing with these particular human errors or hiding errors. It really drives through the wrong type of behaviours. And that is as a direct result of setting a KPI that drives that type of behaviour. Measures really need to align to the organised strategy and objectives. If quality is in those objectives, then a better metric surely would be something like a team objective or reward strategy to identify positive initiatives that drive lower levels of human error. This way, the accountability is moved from the individual to teams. It removes competition between individuals, and it rewards potentially, the strategy that relates to positive change and positive behavioural change, which leads to that much better positive quality culture that we're looking for. So that's what I'm saying about really thinking about how KPIs need to align to those overall vision and strategy that leads through to the behaviours that you're looking for. Another case study here on the right is talking about a startup organisation. This is really a tension between structure and people. The organisation in this instance was moving from a startup into the regulated space. They'd invested an awful amount of money on highly talented individuals, but they were hampered by slow decision making and low motivation of staff. They also found that this was impacting engagement, performance, and creativity. The issue, as we found when we worked with this organisation, was that decisions were being made only by senior teams and senior level individuals. The organisation had not evolved and moved as the organisation had changed. There were still very low levels of organisation, even though there were incredibly talented individuals within the organisation. And there were few opportunities for development and progression because the structure just wasn't set up and aligned in that way. So the learnings and advice that we provided to the organisation were that as an organisation is evolving, they need to monitor the structure and all of those other elements. And if you like, the elements of Galbraith Star. So you need to assess that for those alignments all the way through as the organisation is moving. You can't stand still. You have to constantly reassess how the organisation is changing to the evolving business model. Talent acquisition strategy needs to be aligned to a development and retention strategy. So all of that needs to be thought about at the same time as you're evolving. And you need to understand the best environment that you need to really provide in order for people to really thrive. And decision making needs to be delegated, and empowerment needs to really come through with that. This is really to maintain that engagement, especially when you're employing highly talented individuals. And procedures need to be managed against the organisation's risk appetite. So, of course, delegation of decision making needs to be aligned to that risk appetite or risk tolerance. And if there is a misalignment there, it might require additional training or just a greater level of understanding of that risk tolerance and risk appetite in order to put mitigating steps in. So there are real tangible actions that could be taken as this organisation was growing, but indeed now retrospectively, to correct those misalignments in order to change the culture and drive forward a much higher performing organisation that's much more highly engaged. So I guess, when we really sit back and think about culture, culture change does require a lot of effort. It isn't something that will just happen overnight. It can take many months or even years. But it does require a comprehensive analysis and assessment of the organisation's current state. It requires sustained commitment from leadership, unwavering commitment. It requires collective accountability for quality and a clear and aligned plan for ongoing maturity. What does success look like then? I think what's interesting to reflect here is what we've seen as NSF practitioners who are doing these sorts of assessments all the time, is that for low maturity organisations, those that aren't really developed yet or are still in their maturity journey, what we've seen is a lot of out-of-date procedures not being adequately or correctly followed, little to no proactive work on continuous improvement. We also see really low levels of innovation and creativity. We see higher levels, however, of perhaps unplanned work or deviations or excursions, low levels of staff morale and higher levels of attrition, and all of these would follow. And if any of these are feeling familiar, even if they're not all of them, then again, do get in touch and we can help you on that maturity journey. Because higher levels of quality and culture maturity really do demonstrate some positive impact. We see lower levels of rework and unplanned work, higher levels of continuous improvement, application of best practice and workforce efficiency, higher levels of trust and autonomy, leading to enhanced engagement and retention, and better risk and investment decisions. Furthermore, this has on occasion resulted in also a perceived or perhaps real risk of other issues here. So if you have a lower level of maturity, we also see lower levels of fairness, inclusion, and equality. The link between low quality maturity and poor equality, diversity, and inclusion in staff survey results, for example, is a relatively new finding at NSF. But I think if you start thinking about trust and inclusion and diversity in terms of diversity of thinking, it only follows that actually if you've got a mature organisation that is really driving innovation and people's input into innovation, you're going to get more diverse environment. Likewise, if you've got greater levels of trust, you're also going to see more delegation and empowerment and so on. So I think there is a really clear link here between a higher level of maturity leading to higher levels of EDI. So another reason that this is a really vital tool for organisations. If we also look at the cost of poor quality and the impact that this has on the bottom line, it's another important point that really does bring home the importance of QMM and quality culture. I think we can define cost of poor quality as any cost that would not be incurred if quality were perfect. That's quite a good definition that I've seen. But in general, it tends to include things like preventative costs, measurement, appraisal costs or audit costs, remedial and failure costs, including things like supply chain disruptions, and consequential costs such as diverse business impacts. So it's quite wide and varying in terms of what the cost of poor quality would encompass. But we've done some research and we've identified that it's not uncommon for the cost of poor quality to range between 25 and 40% of revenue, of sales revenue, for immature or developing organisations. That percentage can drop quite dramatically as an organisation matures, even to levels of around 3, 5 or 7% of cost of revenue. So a very big financial saving if you manage to implement the maturity roadmap. So it's really worth thinking about what impact it can have on your organisation. And as you can see here in the slide, there is a clear graph that shows as your maturity level increases, the cost obviously decreases, but equally the investment cost that's needed over that course of that duration of your journey also gradually decreases. Of course, there is investment to start with, but that goes without saying. So finally, I come back to the quote that I put out right at the start of this webinar. And as I said, there was one important element where Gerstner felt that he would have been wrong. And what is that? Culture. As he said in his words, culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. In the end, an organisation is nothing more than the collective capacity of its people to create value, which I think is a really nice place to stop and end. And hopefully that gives you an understanding of why we're driving forward these really helpful maturity assessment tools, both with QMM and with culture. And if you want to hear more, then please do get in touch. As I say, you can either send questions to healthsciences@nsf.org or to me, which my email address will be on the next slide. But as you can see here, the white papers are available, both the QMM and the quality culture white papers, online and downloadable. But if you want to know any more about me or NSF, please do get in touch. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. I hope you found it enjoyable, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.